Right, why are we doing this? So you asked for a bike check. Don't really know why you want to see mine, but here you go. 2020 300cc Beta Evo, and yeah, it's good. We'll start at the front and work our way back, I suppose. I'm using 5-inch Renthal handlebars. Most bikes come standard with 4.5, some of them even a 4-inch rise, but I like to go up half an inch. I'm 6'3", and the only reason I really do it is for the Scottish 6-day trail. I just like to be up on the front a little bit more, just so I'm not pushing too hard down on the handlebars. If I wasn't riding that event, I think I would just stick with 4.5, but it definitely does make it a little bit more comfortable, and it also gives you a little bit more room on the bike, just because where you have your bars tilted further forward, where it's a higher rise, it just gives you that little bit more room. Like I said, I'm quite tall, so it just helps. Brakes, just keeping the standard Gramica Master Cylinders on there. So yeah, I'm using the S3 lever adjusters. You can just adjust by hand, don't need Allen keys. Pretty simple, easy to use when you're on the go. You don't need any tools, so that's a good thing. I use lanyard kill button. I think it's silly not to. It's just safer if you do crash. You know, the amount of times we get bikes in the shop where we have to do like a new piston and a replate on the barrel because they've dropped their bike at the top of a muddy hill climb and they've slid back down and the bike's just revving its kahunas off. Normally I use Renthal medium grips, but this year I've been using the new Domino Slimline. They're very similar to the Renthals actually, but I'd say they're kind of like a compound between the Renthal medium and the Renthal firm, and I'd say they last a tiny bit longer than the Renthal. Actually no, I'd say they last a lot longer than the Renthals because this is still my original set. I know I've not been riding that much, but no, they're lasting up pretty well. The only thing I would say is they're not quite as grippy as a brand new fresh pair of Renthals, but no, they're good. I think I'm going to carry on using them. They come in 2 different colours. I've got the darker colour, trying to go a bit more stealth. Bar ends, I've got some nylon bar ends. Those are a prototype one that they don't use any bolts, so they're quite a clean, nice look. Kind of testing some out. We might try and get some of those on the market later in the year. Domino, I've got a quick action on there. I do actually sometimes use slow action. It just depends what I'm riding, what type of event, things like that. On the throttle actually, whilst we're talking about it, I've done a little mod on the throttle cable. Being husky, sometimes if you push your belly on over the front of the bike, you can push the throttle cable and it can pop out of the housing. So we've just done this little wired mod and it can't come out that way. It's just something that does happen to me quite a bit with my build. Down to the forks, I'm using the Gypsy stiffer fork spring. I think it's 10% stiffer than standard. Where I'm quite husky built, you know, it is a little bit soft, the standard spring. So if you're anything over 80 kilograms, I'd say it's probably a good idea to maybe try one. It does seem to help, and you don't get any bottom out after swapping over to the stiffer spring. On my rebound setting, I go 10 clicks from fully open, and I just really like that feel and how that responds. So that's my setting on the fork. I swap out the front mudguard. Normally I used to run a gas front mudguard and a gas brace. This year I'm trying out the Gypsy mudguard, and that uses like a 4RT brace, and I've managed to find a carbon fibre one, which is quite hard to get hold of these days, but so that's quite fancy, something new. I like it, and the reason I do it is because the original front mudguards on the Betas, they come down and they're cut off quite short, so you tend to get a bit of muck getting up in your radiator, which can cause overheating. So I like to have like this mudguard. It comes down a lot further and it's really low profile. It sits really down low to the tyre, so it really stops any muck and mud from getting in that radiator, which is a good thing. Standard front wheels, standard front disc, BVM rim stickers. BVM fork stickers, BVM number board. I've had a few people comment on this actually, is we've got the light from the original headlight wired in, so it actually kind of shines up. It's just something a bit different, gets people talking. I have moved the rectifier. Now most people, and it's something we do quite a bit at the shop, is we will bolt it to the back of a number board, but we have moved it under the seat unit. The Scottish 6 Day and a few other events I do, you actually have to use their boards, so it's a bit of a pain and it's a bit untidy having a board on top of another board and so on. So that's why we've moved it under there. It's nice and neat out the way. It is quite a lot of work and quite a lot of effort to do it, but you know, done it. Engine wise, I don't do anything. It's just standard, no kind of tuning up or anything like that. Standard reed block. I don't change any carb settings, so like jets, needle height, everything is just as it come out of the box. I might adjust the float height ever so slightly, it just depends, each bike's different. A Csp Bash Plate on. It's slightly wider and slightly stronger. Just put that on mainly because of the Scottish 6 Day, where you're catching quite a lot of rocks, so just trying to protect the engine as well as I can. So it's just a little bit stronger and a little bit wider. That's the main reason for that. Found one of these carbon fibre covers. Normally I run a Trick Bits plastic guard, but we found this and I thought it looks a bit bling, I'll put it on. But I do actually think the plastic ones are more protective, where this I think would just split quite easy, and the Trick Bits ones come round a bit nicer as well. Gearlever, you might have noticed we've just been playing around. We've got a milling machine at home, so we've just taken some out of that Gearlever. I've got one of the Beta factory oil filler plugs, anodized red, go faster red. S3 curved footrest. I really like these. I've had these on a couple of bikes now, and they're some of the strongest aluminium foot pegs, I reckon. Where I'm quite heavy, sometimes they can drop quite quickly, but I found these have stayed nice and perky for quite a long time. They're also good because they've got the washer system, so you can have them further forward or further back. And these particular ones I think are good because they're really quite low down as well. So when I set them right back, it just gives me that a lot more space on the bike, which I really like. I don't like to feel cramped up when I'm riding. These are also tilted further forward, so it's more like you're riding on your toes, which I think helps a bit with finding the grip in the mud. I think it just sort of pushes down and back a bit more. So yeah, I like you running those. What else have we got? Swap out to the NG FIM approved rear disc. They're stronger and they're better, I think. I think there's a bit better braking power from it compared to the normal standard disc. So yeah, I'm quite happy with that. One other thing I always do is I swap out the brake pads straight away when I get a new bike. I always use Galfer, the Galfer red front and rear. They just work. Whatever the weather condition, whether it's wet, muddy, dry, you can always rely on them, where I think some other compounds are good when it's wet but not good when it's dry, and some are good when it's dry and not when it's wet. So that's the reason for that. On this bike I'm running the Öhlins, which we can get custom built to order. If you just give us your weight, what bike you want it fitted to, and the style of riding and the type of terrain you ride, Öhlins will build them up to your spec basically, and that's what they've done for me. And yeah, I really like it. I never used to kind of bother with different suspension and such, but since I've done it, I've really noticed the difference, because you know the standard ones just aren't set for someone of my build. I'm running the Gypsy solid rear sprocket purely down to safety. You can lose fingers if you're not careful, so I always change that over now. I don't mess around. BVM airbox decal, just protecting the plastic. Your boot does rub it quite a lot, so it does scuff up the plastic quite badly. That just helps it in representing the shop. Now, I don't like to clutter the bike too much. Trick Bits make a guard to cover your rear master cylinder, because that is something else that does get rubbed quite a bit with your boot, and you end up wearing you can end up wearing a hole actually in the cap or over by the corner by the sight glass of the master cylinder if you're not careful. So they do make a large cover that protects all that, which works really well, but I wanted something quite a bit smaller. So we found like an old frame guard that was bust, and we actually heated it up and moulded it and cut out a smaller version just to fit my bike, just to keep that nice and fresh. It looks quite smart, you don't really notice it. I have got the SFS silicone hose on the back of the airbox. It just makes life a lot easier when you want to get your carb off. You know, that's the main reason for it. The standard one's fine, it's just really quite stiff, so it's quite hard to be able to pull your carb out without taking the back of your airbox off. This way you can literally just undo the Jubilee clips and pull the carb out. Works quite easy, nice and quick for like events like the Scottish. I've got a idle screw adjuster, S3 one. I don't bother with the air screw just because I find it you can't be too precise with the air screw, where I quite like that nice flat head, the original one, where you can definitely know how much you've turned it and get your settings just right. Adding an extra fuel filter into the fuel line into the carburetor. I do have a larger extended float bowl on the bike, mainly because we sell them just to show it off. I think it helps some bikes, like the 125s, sometimes when they're going up really big steep hills, when they're really revving them, they can end up running out of fuel a little bit in them, but I've never really noticed it on many of the bigger bikes. Maybe on the odd one or two big trails like the Nut or the Colmore, when it's really wet and muddy, when you're revving your bike up a big long hill for quite a long amount of time, maybe you do start to get a bit of fuel starvation, but you know, it holds a little bit more fuel in there and it looks quite trick. So it's on my bike. Tyres, I always run Michelin up front. At the moment I got an X-Lite on there. I'd normally use an X11 for like the Scottish 6-day trial, but then I'll use X11 or X-Lite on the front for the rest of the year. Rear at the moment I've got a Michelin X-Lite. I'll swap rears between Michelin and IRC. If it's a real wet muddy trial, I'll put an IRC on. I just think they're very good in the wet and the mud. But if it's anything where there's a bit of rock, then I always use the Michelin. I think Michelin are the best all-round tyre by far, but IRC is a very good mud tyre, so I will swap between the two. Also on the master cylinders, I changed these bolts to domed head bolts rather than the ones that stick out a bit more, just because you can hit them on your hip bone if you're unlucky, and that just makes it a bit flusher, less likely to do some damage. I do have these stops on the bike just because I find the Beta turning circles so tight that I can find myself almost kind of tucking in a bit sometimes. So that gives me, it only spaces it out a couple of mil either side, but it just stops me from tucking in, I find. Plus it stops the stanchion from smashing on the tank, so that's always good. On the bottom of the radiator I've got one of the Trick Bits Mudguard flaps, splash guards, Mudguard, splash guards, whatever you want to call it. That stops a lot of the muck from building up and gathering around the front of the bow, around the exhaust. When that happens, it can make the bike get a lot hotter a lot quicker, which isn't great. You don't want it to overheat, so that kind of keeps a lot of the mud away from it, which helps keep the engine cool. I've also got one of these flaps on the front of the radiator. It's only small, but you'll find that will help keep mud out of the radiator really well. It just stops anything, you know, that's coming up. It just stops it from getting up there, and after most trials there's hardly anything in my rad. Where I look at some other people's bikes who don't do anything, and their radiators can be full of mud, which isn't great, and it makes the bike run hotter, which isn't ideal. On the rear brake, rather than keeping that weird spring-loaded pin to hold the rod in place, I've replaced that with an Allen key, a nut and bolt, just so it's solid. It's not going to go anywhere, it's not going to ping off. It's just something a bit more robust and something you're less likely going to lose. One of the other things we do is wire lock this bolt in place. It's something that does come loose sometimes on that rear exhaust mount, so having it wire locked on just means it's not going to go anywhere. One other thing we would do for Scotland, which I haven't done yet on this bike, is we'd also wire lock on the kickstart bolt. We'd just drill a small hole through the head and then wire lock that to the back of the kickstart shaft. Just again, it's something else that can come loose and come off if you're not paying attention, especially on like long trials like the Scottish. so it's just one less thing to worry about. And yeah, it's good.